My name is Julia Chen. I'm 34 years old. And the moment that shattered everything wasn't when I infiltrated a cartel safe house with nothing but a wire and a prayer, or when I spent 6 months undercover with traffickers who'd kill me if they knew my real name. It was standing in a cruise line HR office, wearing my only interview suit, listening to a woman half my age tell me I wasn't polished enough for their company. To my husband's family, I'm already a failure, the cop who can't afford their country club lifestyle, who embarrasses their son at dinner parties with my discount wardrobe and overtime shifts. They whisper about me like I'm damaged goods, measuring my worth in salary figures that don't account for the federal badge hidden in my sock drawer. We need someone with more presence, the recruiter said, her eyes dismissing my Target blazer and secondhand heels with surgical precision. I nodded, swallowing the humiliation, because I needed that second job. Because FBI salaries don't cover private school tuition and the mortgage on a house his parents insisted we buy. Because sometimes even undercover agents have to smile while being told they're not good enough. But that morning, I was just Julia. The disappointment. The woman who couldn't even land a cruise ship job. Tomorrow would tell a very different story. The dining room felt like a courtroom I'd been dragged into for 4 years. And the verdict was always the same. Guilty of not being enough. My mother-in-law's house could have been lifted straight from a suburban magazine floral wallpaper, matching curtains, a china cabinet stacked with wedding gifts, family photos staged to prove they'd made all the right choices. Tonight's dinner was supposed to celebrate my brother-in-law's promotion. Instead, it became another trial of my failures. The table groaned under a flawless feast. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, her signature apple pie. Every dish a reminder that real women created domestic perfection unlike me, the woman too exhausted from work to cook anything more than microwaved leftovers. I sat between my husband David and his cousin Mark. Across from me, Julia Chen presided like a judge ready to deliver sentence. Her voice, sharp and deliberate, cut across the table. A 34-year-old woman, still scraping by on a cop's salary. My son deserved better than this. The words hit like a slap. Around me, silence fell not awkward, but expectant. Everyone knew their role in this performance. She gestured to Mark, who managed a car dealership. Look at him, building a future. But Julia, she let my name hang like an accusation. Then James, David's brother, leaned in with that cruel smirk. You know, Julia, cruise lines hire greeters. Smiles, handshakes, even you could manage that. Oh wait, nobody hires people without experience. Laughter rippled through the room. Polite, cutting, the kind of amusement from people who'd never had their worth questioned. My grip tightened on the fork. Outside in my car sat the FBI badge and weapon I couldn't bring to family dinners. 6 years undercover, dismantling trafficking networks across 3 states, and here, I was just the low-paid cop. They couldn't know the clearances I held, the commendations I'd earned. David finally spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. She's right, Julia. Look around. Everyone here is building something, real careers, real futures. And you, he waved his beer bottle at me. You're crawling for pennies, making us both look like failures. Crawling for pennies. Just last week, I'd crawled through a window to rescue 2 teenage girls trafficked from Guatemala. But to David, success was a salary figure, a country club membership, a polished wife. The laughter rose again. 14 relatives united in judgment. Patricia dabbed her eyes like she was mourning the daughter-in-law she wished she'd had. I cut my turkey methodically, face calm, carrying secrets that would have made their suburban dramas seem like children's theater. They mistook silence for weakness. They didn't know silence was operational security. 3 days later, I walked into the gleaming lobby of coastal luxury cruise lines. My resume was printed on expensive paper that had cost me $20 I couldn't spare. Chrome, glass, leather, this was the world Patricia believed her son belonged in. Not me, the woman in a thrift store blazer driving a 10-year-old Honda. The receptionist eyed my outfit with polite pity before sending me upstairs. Amanda Rodriguez, late 20s, flawless suit, perfect makeup, greeted me with a professional smile. Miss Chen, please this way. Her office overlooked the harbor, cruise ships gleaming like floating cities. She scanned my resume with practiced detachment. Police work, interesting background, But we're looking for hospitality experience. I understand, I said evenly. I'm a quick learner. I work well under pressure. I'm sure you do. She set the paper aside, her smile sympathetic but final. But cruise operations are very specific guest services, conflict resolution, maintaining atmosphere. Maybe try retail? Something more aligned with your skills. The words were chosen carefully, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. You're not polished enough. I forced a practiced smile, the same one I'd worn undercover when I needed to blend in. I appreciate your time, men. As I walked out, rejection heavy in my chest, I told myself I'd failed again, failed to ease the debts, failed to silence David's complaints, failed to prove to his family that I was worth keeping. What I didn't know, what no one in that glass tower knew, was that within 72 hours, Amanda Rodriguez would be trapped aboard the Mediterranean Star with 200 hostages. And the unqualified woman she'd dismissed would be the only thing standing between them and terrorists armed with enough explosives to sink the ship. That night, though, I was still just Julia Chen, the disappointment, the woman who couldn't even land a cruise ship job. I collected my purse from the chair with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't let themselves. Years of undercover work had taught me how to maintain composure when everything inside was screaming, how to walk with dignity when shame burned like acid in your throat. Amanda Rodriguez was already turning back to her computer, my rejection so routine it didn't warrant a second glance. Another failed applicant, another resume for the digital trash bin. I could add this to the growing list of reasons David's family had for dismissing me as worthless. The hallway stretched before me like a gauntlet, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Expensive art on cream-colored walls, the kind of corporate elegance that said you don't belong here in a language everyone understood. My discount heels clicked against polished marble while young professionals breezed past in their Ann Taylor suits and confident smiles. I was halfway to the elevator bank when the world exploded. The sound hit first, a percussion blast that shook the building's foundation and made windows rattle in their frames, then screams. Then the kind of chaos that happens when ordinary Tuesday afternoons transform into something people will remember for the rest of their lives. Armed men burst through the main entrance like a military operation, 12 of them in tactical gear, faces covered, weapons raised. A K-47 seconds that looked military-grade, sidearms strapped to their thighs, and something that made my blood freeze, explosive vests with enough C4 to level the entire floor. Everyone down, now. The leader's voice carried across the lobby with authority that came from men who'd done this before. His English was accented Middle Eastern, maybe Syrian, but his tactical training was evident in how his team moved with precision through the building. Automatic gunfire shredded the ceiling, raining plaster and acoustic tiles on screaming employees who dove under desks and behind furniture. The receptionist who'd looked at me with pity 20 minutes earlier was now sobbing beneath her station, mascara running down her face in black streams. I dropped to the floor with everyone else, my mind already shifting into operational mode while my body played the terrified civilian. Around me, 200 people were processing the reality that their ordinary workday had become a hostage situation. Mothers clutched children who'd been visiting for Bring Your Kid to Work Day. Businessmen in $1,000 suits pressed themselves against walls, their corporate confidence evaporating under the reality of weapons pointed at their heads. Amanda Rodriguez was frozen behind her glass desk, her professional composure shattered as thoroughly as the lobby windows. Training kicked in like muscle memory. Breathe, assess, observe, count hostiles, identify weapons, map exits, calculate response times for SWAT teams that hadn't been called yet because no one had managed to trigger an alarm. 12 tangos. 4 covering the main entrance. 3 securing the elevator banks. 2 sweeping offices for anyone hiding. 1 on communications. 2 guarding what looked like the building manager they'd grabbed as leverage. All armed with automatic weapons. All wearing suicide vests that meant negotiation would be complicated. The leader, I designated him Alpha, barked orders in Arabic to his team while keeping his AK trained on the crowd. He was methodical, professional, the kind of operator who'd planned this down to the second. This wasn't amateur hour. This was a coordinated attack on a target they'd studied for months. Phones on the ground. Alpha commanded in English, his voice carrying over the sobbing and prayers. Anyone reaches for a device, everyone dies. You understand? The sound of phones hitting marble echoed through the lobby like small explosions. Hundreds of devices are connections to the outside world, to 911. To anyone who could help scattered across the floor like discarded hope. I dropped mine with everyone else, watching from beneath lowered lashes as the terrorists herded people toward the center of the lobby. 200 hostages being compressed into a space designed for aesthetic appeal, not survival. Bodies pressed together, fear spreading like contagion as people realized they might not see their families again. No backup, no communications, no weapon except the tactical training that had been drilled into me during 16 weeks at Quantico and 6 years of field operations. I was supposed to be the rejected job applicant, the unqualified candidate who wasn't polished enough for their cruise ship empire. But as I watched Alpha coordinate his team with military precision, as I calculated entry points and calculated the blast radius of those suicide vests, I understood something fundamental had shifted. In the next 60 seconds, someone would die. Either Alpha would execute a hostage to establish dominant standard terrorist playbook for situations like this, or I would make a move that could save everyone or get us all killed. My FBI training had prepared me for undercover operations, for gathering intelligence, for testifying in federal court. But nothing really prepares you for the moment when 200 lives depend on decisions you make in the space between heartbeats. I kept my head down, breathing steady, hands visible, playing the terrified civilian while my mind ran through tactical scenarios. The security guards were already dead. I'd seen the bodies when Alpha's team first breached. The building's panic buttons had been disabled, which meant they'd had inside information about the security systems. This wasn't random, this was planned. And somewhere in that planning, they'd made assumptions about who they'd find in this building on a Tuesday afternoon. They'd assumed corporate employees, soft targets, people who'd never faced violence beyond what they saw on Netflix. They hadn't assumed Special Agent Julia Chen would be standing in their lobby, wearing a target blazer and carrying 6 years of tactical training that most federal agents never get to use in the field. As Alpha began separating hostages, women and children to one side, men to another, I understood that the moment for action was approaching. In terrorist operations, separation meant selection. Selection meant execution. And execution meant I had about 90 seconds to decide if I was going to blow my cover and probably my life, or watch innocent people die while maintaining an identity that had already cost me everything that mattered. David's family thought I was worthless. Amanda Rodriguez thought I wasn't qualified for her cruise ship. In 60 seconds, they were all about to discover exactly what the low-paid officer was capable of when lives hung in the balance. But first, I had to make a choice that would either save everyone in this room or add 200 names to the list of people who died because I wasn't brave enough to act when it mattered most. The moment came when Tango 4 grabbed a 6-year-old boy from his mother's arms. The kid was screaming, tears streaming down his face while his mother tried to hold on, her fingernails leaving scratches on the terrorist's tactical vest. Tango 4, stocky, mid-30s, the kind of operator who enjoyed causing pain, pressed his Glock against the child's temple. "Shut up," he screamed in accented English. "Everyone shut up or boy dies." The lobby fell silent except for muffled sobbing. 200 people holding their breath while a child's life hung in the balance of a terrorist's trigger finger. Training said wait. Training said assess the situation, let SWAT handle it, don't blow cover unless absolutely necessary. Training said a lot of things that made sense in classrooms at Quantico but meant nothing when you were watching a man put a gun to a child's head. I rose slowly from my position on the floor, hands visible, moving with the kind of deliberate calm that came from 6 years of talking my way out of situations where hesitation meant death. "Let him go." My voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Take me instead." Every eye in that room turned toward me, the rejected job applicant, the woman in the discount blazer who wasn't polished enough for their cruise ship empire. Tango 4's attention shifted from the screaming child to the woman who'd just volunteered to die. "You?" He laughed, distracted for exactly 1 second. "You nobody?" I drove my elbow into his throat with force that came from 16 weeks of defensive tactics training and 6 years of field experience. The Glock clattered across marble as his hands went to his crushed windpipe, gasping for air that wouldn't come. The crowd erupted in gasps, shock, and horror, and something approaching awe as the failed wife transformed into something they'd never imagined. But I was already moving. Tango 4's rifle was in my hands before his knees hit the ground. Muscle memory from hundreds of hours on the range kicked in check chamber, assess safety, acquire target. The weight felt familiar, comfortable, like coming home to something I'd been pretending I'd forgotten how to use. Federal agent. My voice carried across the lobby with absolute authority. Everyone stay down. The remaining terrorists processed this information in the split second before chaos erupted. Alpha raised his AK, finger moving toward the trigger that would end everything. I was faster. 3-round burst, center mass, exactly like they drilled into us at Quantico. Alpha dropped before his weapon cleared firing position, surprise frozen on his face behind the balaclava. Then hell broke loose. Automatic gunfire shredded the air as the remaining tangos opened up. I dove behind a marble reception desk that had been designed for aesthetics, not ballistic protection. Bullets chewed through expensive decor while terrified hostages screamed and scrambled for cover. Training took over completely. Assess threats, prioritize targets, move with purpose. Tango 2 was reloading. I put 2 rounds through his shoulder before he could chamber another magazine. Tango 6 was advancing on my position. I used a desk chair as a battering ram, driving it into his knees with enough force to shatter bone. The lobby became a war zone. Glass shattered. Plaster dust filled the air. The smell of cordite mixed with fierce sweat and blood while I moved through the space like I'd trained for this exact scenario. Because I had. Hundreds of times. In simulators and live-fire exercises and field operations that most FBI agents never experience. While David's family had been mocking my low-paid work, I'd been learning how to do exactly this, how to be the last line of defense when everything else failed. Tango 8 came at me with a knife, Kabar, military issue, designed for close-quarters killing. I caught his wrist mid-thrust, used his momentum against him, twisted until I felt bones snap like dry kindling. His scream echoed off marble walls while the knife skittered away across blood-slicked floor. Around me, hostages were processing what they were witnessing. The woman who'd been rejected for a cruise ship job was systematically dismantling a terrorist cell with the kind of efficiency that came from years of training they couldn't begin to comprehend. I grabbed the PA microphone that had been knocked to the floor during the initial assault. My voice filled the building, steady and authoritative despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Everyone stay down. I'm FBI. You're going to live through this. Trust me. The room froze. 200 faces staring at me like I was someone who'd materialized from an alternate dimension. Amanda Rodriguez was pressed against her glass desk, mascara streaked, her professional dismissal of me transforming into something approaching understanding. That's when Alpha moved. I'd hit him center mass, but his vest had absorbed the rounds. He was injured, bleeding, but functional enough to reach for the detonator strapped to his chest. One button push and everyone in this building would become pink, mist, and shattered glass. I launched myself across the lobby like a missile, tackling him through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the harbor. Glass exploded around us as we hit the exterior wall, 3 stories above the street, held in place only by the window's safety film. We fought in midair, suspended between life and death, his hands reaching for the detonator while mine fought for the wrist that would end 200 lives. Blood made everything slippery. Broken glass cut through my blazer, my skin, finding every vulnerable spot. His thumb was on the trigger. 1 more millimeter of pressure in physics would take over explosive chain reaction, building collapse, death on a scale that would dominate headlines for months. I twisted his wrist with every ounce of strength I had left, using leverage instead of muscle, technique instead of force. Something popped bone or tendon, I couldn't tell and didn't care, and the detonator fell from nerveless fingers. My final strike was precise elbow to his temple with force that came from knowing exactly where to hit to shut down consciousness without killing. He went limp in my arms, 3 stories above the street, held only by safety glass that was already cracking under our combined weight. Silence fell over the lobby. Not the silence of fear anymore, but the stunned quiet that comes when people process the impossible becoming real. Sirens wailed in the distance, SWAT teams responding to the alarm that someone had finally managed to trigger. But the crisis was over. 12 terrorists neutralized, 200 hostages safe, 0 casualties except the people who'd come here to kill. I pulled myself back through the broken window, leaving Alpha unconscious and zip-tied with his own restraints. My hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting as my body processed what I'd just done. The low-paid officer had just saved everyone David's family thought she wasn't worthy of protecting. The first SWAT team hit the building 6 minutes after my final takedown boots thundering up stairwells, tactical gear rattling, the familiar sound of American law enforcement responding to a crisis that was already over. I stood in the center of the lobby, surrounded by unconscious terrorists and 200 hostages who were processing what they'd just witnessed. Blood streaked my discount blazer. Glass fragments glittered in my hair like diamonds. My hands were steady despite the adrenaline crash that was making my legs want to give out. The tactical team burst through the entrance with weapons raised, prepared for active combat. Instead, they found 12 neutralized threats, 0 casualties, and a woman in a target suit standing over the carnage like she'd just finished routine paperwork. Commander Sarah Mitchell, I recognized her from Joint Operations training, lowered her rifle as her eyes swept the scene. Professional assessment. Threat eliminated. Hostages secure. Situation controlled. Then her gaze found mine, and recognition hit like electricity. Agent Chen? Her voice carried clearly across the shattered lobby. Julia Chen, FBI? I nodded, too exhausted for words, feeling the weight of 6 years of undercover work finally lifting from shoulders that had carried secrets too heavy to share with anyone who mattered. Commander Mitchell's salute was crisp, immediate, the kind of military precision that acknowledged one warrior recognizing another. Behind her, 20 tactical operators came to attention in perfect unison. Welcome back to the world, Agent Chen. Mitchell's voice filled the lobby with authority that made hostages straighten despite their trauma. You've done more today than 10 tactical units combined. The salute rippled through her team like a wave. 20 professional operators honoring someone they'd only heard about in classified briefings, the undercover agent whose operations had dismantled trafficking networks across 3 states. But it was what happened next that changed everything. Cell phones emerged from pockets despite earlier orders to leave them on the ground. Passengers who'd been too terrified to breathe were now filming, streaming, uploading to platforms that would carry this moment across the entire internet within minutes. FBI agent saves 200 lives in terrorist attack. The headlines started trending before the first ambulance arrived. Video clips, shaky, adrenaline-fueled footage of the rejected job applicant taking down armed terrorists went viral faster than the FBI's media team could coordinate official statements. I didn't know it yet, but 40 miles away in Westchester, David and his family were gathered for their Tuesday evening ritual dinner and television, comfortable routine in their suburban bubble. His mother, Patricia, was probably complaining about something, his brother James was likely checking his phone for stock prices, and David himself was counting down minutes until he could escape to his home office. Then every news channel cut to breaking coverage. Patricia's wine glass, I learned this later from David's tearful confession, hit the carpet as she watched security footage of her worthless daughter-in-law systematically neutralizing a terrorist cell with the kind of tactical precision that made network analysts compare me to special forces operators. David told me he couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was seeing. The woman he'd called low-paid, the wife he'd been embarrassed by, the disappointment his mother had mocked at family dinners. She was standing in front of news cameras with an FBI jacket over blood-stained clothes, accepting gratitude from the director of the bureau himself. But I didn't know any of that yet. In that moment, I was standing in the lobby of coastal luxury cruise lines, surrounded by people who'd dismissed me hours earlier, and were now looking at me like I was someone they'd never really seen before. Amanda Rodriguez, the HR manager who'd rejected my application, approached with tears streaming down her face. You saved us. You saved everyone. I met her eyes with the same calm I'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. I did my job. Your job? She gestured at the destroyed lobby, at the terrorists being loaded into federal custody, at the miracle of 200 people who would go home to their families because one unqualified applicant had been in the right place at the right time. This is what you do? This is who I am, I corrected her. This is who I've always been. The media descended like locusts, cameras, microphones, reporters shouting questions about how it felt to be a hero, about my training, about the operation that had just concluded. The FBI's public affairs team tried to control the narrative, but there was no containing this story. I stood before those cameras, still wearing my Target blazer with bullet holes and bloodstains, and spoke the truth I'd been carrying for 6 years. All my life, my voice carried clearly across news broadcasts that were streaming to millions. I've been told I wasn't enough, that my work was small, that I had no future worth celebrating. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me, hostages whose lives I'd saved, tactical operators who recognized a fellow warrior, and somewhere beyond the cameras, a family that was finally understanding exactly who they'd been dismissing for 4 years. But courage doesn't wear a title, I continued, my words cutting through the chaos with the authority that comes from having earned every syllable. Courage doesn't beg for approval. It acts when the world needs it most. The applause started with the hostages tentative at first, then building until it became something more than gratitude. It was recognition, validation. The sound of 200 people finally seeing someone who'd been invisible to them just hours earlier. Today, you've seen who I really am, I said, looking directly into cameras that were broadcasting my face to a nation that had already made me their hero. Not a failure, not just a wife, not someone who wasn't polished enough for your cruise ship. I gestured to the FBI jacket that had replaced my discount blazer, to the tactical team standing behind me in silent support, to the evidence of capabilities that couldn't be measured in salary figures or suburban approval. I am a federal agent, I declared, my voice steady despite exhaustion that was making everything feel surreal. And I will never apologize for fighting for this country, for strangers who became family in moments of crisis, for all of you. The ovation that followed lasted 7 minutes. Passengers chanted my name, Julia. Julia, Julia, while news anchors struggled to find words adequate for what they were witnessing. Tomorrow, David would call begging for forgiveness. Patricia would send flowers with cards that couldn't erase 4 years of cruelty. James would explain he'd always known I was special. But tonight, I was just Julia Chen, federal agent, tactical operator, the woman who'd walked into a job interview and walked out having saved 200 lives. And that was all the validation I'd ever need. Julia's story reminds us that worth isn't defined by other people's limited vision, that heroism often hides behind ordinary job titles, and that the most qualified people are sometimes the ones dismissed as not good enough. Follow for more hidden hero stories. Subscribe for stories about people whose most important work happens in the shadows, whose sacrifices go unrecognized, whose true qualifications would shock the people who dismiss them. Share this story with someone who needs to know their value isn't measured by people who can't see the full picture.